So McLaren is one of those brands where I think they create very good looking cars, and I know they're not for everybody, but I do like the style of them very much. That being said, because McLaren releases so many different models in such a short time frame at that, it makes it very hard to distinguish which McLaren you're looking at. Now, most McLarens do have the actual model as a badge on the car itself. But if you were to see a McLaren in traffic or you were to see it on the road, you might not be able to see that badge. And so, unless you're really familiar with McLaren's cars, you're probably not 100% sure which McLaren you're looking at. And while there are McLarens that do stand out visually from the others, I know there are people that struggle to identify whether they're seeing a 570S, a 570 GT, or a 600LT. And that is the purpose of this video, just to help you identify which McLaren you're looking at, or to help you get better acquainted with the visual styling of McLaren if you're not super familiar already. By the end of this video, you will be able to tell the difference between a 570S and a 570 GT. Two cars, by the way, which look incredibly similar to each other in just about every regard. Just want to mention too, I'm not particularly going to include cars that McLaren has produced that are very, very low run, that are cars you're probably not going to see on a day-to-day basis. Things like the McLaren F1, the McLaren P1, the P1 GTR, the Speedtail. I think everybody knows the Speedtail and would be able to identify that if they saw it. If you see these cars, just know you're seeing something very, very special. And if you manage to see an F1 on the road, just know you saw $20 million driving by. Without further ado though, let's just jump right into it. So first off, we have the McLaren MP4-12C. And this car had a production run from 2011 to 2014. This was McLaren's first production car that was designed entirely by McLaren. And it was the first production road car they put out since the F1. So yeah, their first production road car since the F1 was in 2011. They have not been putting out production road cars for very long at all. And the amount of models they have on the market today is honestly mind-boggling when you think about it that way. So the MP4-12C, I think you'll find, is visually a lot different from the cars that came after. You don't have the McLaren swoosh headlights. Instead, you have a pretty standard set of headlights here that kind of run up the fender over here. And then in earlier models of the MP4-12C, instead of having the McLaren badge on the hood that's on McLarens of today, you had the McLaren swoosh, which was actually pretty cool. But honestly, I do like the McLaren badging today a little better. Now, the side profile of the MP4-12C is really something. It's one of my favorite looks on a McLaren. You have that side ear intake, which just looks great. The whole thing, the curves, the lines, it's just phenomenal. The side profile here looks a lot like the 650S, which came right after in 2014. And you'll actually note that the 650S is more or less visually the same exact car as the MP4-12C. The big difference being the front has now integrated the McLaren swoosh headlights that would proceed to be on other McLaren models for quite some time. But as far as the side profile and the rear goes, the 650S and the MP4-12C are just about the same exact car. So really the big giveaway here is going to be the front of the car. If you see the swoosh headlights on an MP4-12C body, it is a 650S, most likely. If you see non-swoosh headlights, it's probably the MP4-12C. The 675LT was a more track-focused version of the 650S, and what you really want to look for with this one is the rear end of it. You'll notice that looks way different than the 650S. We kind of have a departure from the MP4-12C styling a little bit. There's still some references to it, but you'll notice we have like that circular exhaust pipe. This car is kind of like what the 600LT is to the 570S. Next up, we would have the McLaren 540C. Not really something I'm going to cover. This car wasn't released to the US market. Instead, what they got is the 570S. What the 540C was is essentially a more optimized for luxury version of the 570S. Not really something McLaren was interested in putting out into the US market. But just know, aesthetically from the outside, the 540C and the 570S, they're basically the same car. So with the 570S, we see a departure in the design of the 650S and the MP412C. What did transition over to the 570S was those swoosh headlights that we saw on the 650S. There is a slight difference in the headlights in the 570, and you'll see that in also the 570 GT, the 600LT. Essentially, what you see is a different variation of that swoosh headlight. It's just a much more refined, kind of cleaner design. Now, the 570S from the side, you'll notice it has kind of this two-tone look that goes into a side ear intake. And that is definitely one spot where it's departed from the design of the 650S. But you're really going to see the departure when we move to the rear end of the 570S, where you'll notice complete redesign. We have a much larger rear diffuser. You have McLaren swoosh taillights, which look really cool. And instead of having the exhaust mounted kind of front and center that you had on the MP412C and the 650S, it's kind of spread apart and it's more towards the bottom of the vehicle. Now, design-wise, the 570S is more or less exactly what the GT looks like as well, the 570 GT. The big difference being you'll have to note the engine cover. Right, the engine cover of the 570S, you're going to notice this two-tone style that runs all the way to the lip of the rear, whereas the 570 GT is just one glass window pane. And like depending on like the angle you catch it, it almost looks like it creates one giant sunroof for the McLaren. That's just a quick and easy way to distinguish a 570S from a 570 GT. Now, next up, we have the McLaren 600LT. So the 600LT, which is the model that came after, borrows a lot of design from the 570 as well. And you'll be able to tell that through the side profile of the car, the front of the car. Even the rear of the car has a lot of similarities in design. There are some things from the back of the 600LT that are a bit different. For example, you have a much larger rear diffuser. You have a wing on the 600LT that's not aftermarket. Sometimes you'll have people put aftermarket wings on the 570S. You have the option to get a roof scoop with a 600LT, not something that you can option onto a 570S. There are companies that make fake ones, but if you want a functional one, they come on the 600LT as an optioned item. But if the tail is not a big enough giveaway, the absolute largest giveaway of a 600LT, and it's super unique to this car for McLaren, is the top-mounted exhaust, which I think is one of the coolest things. There is no exhaust on the rear of the car. Definitely a really cool car, and that is the thing to look for if you want to determine if you're looking at a 600LT. Look for the top-mounted exhaust. Just look at the rear of the car. You'll probably be able to tell from that. Now, next up would be the 720S. And honestly, this is a car that just looks like no other car that we talked about so far. Especially when we're talking about the front end of this car, it looks nothing like the previous cars. You have this open housing for the headlights that's just so large, and it looks honestly crazy. It's like a head-turning aspect of the front of this car. It's a design choice that I don't personally like for McLaren. I was a fan of the swoosh headlights, and I think this is a very bold move, but there's no doubt that it makes it incredibly unique. And if you see this car, you will probably know that it is a 720S. The whole side profile is incredibly smooth. There's no visible air intake. It's just a very, very interesting design for the car overall. Anyhow, the biggest difference between the 720S and the 765LT you'll find from the rear end. So with the 765LT, you're going to have a center-mounted quad exhaust, and in the 720S, you're going to have a dual exhaust that is separated by the McLaren badging. McLaren also has a newer car called the Mclaren Gt, which I think is pretty distinguishable in and of itself. It doesn't necessarily look like any other McLaren. The headlight design is different. It has this massive side ear intake. And then, as with other McLaren GT cars, you have that giant rear window panel. Anyhow, that's just a brief rundown of the McLarens you're likely to see on the road. That's all I've got to say for this video. This was a fun one to make. Let me know in the comments what your favorite McLaren model is. Mine, personally, is the 600LT. I think it looks beautiful. I love everything about it. The top-mounted exhaust is crazy, and when you see that thing shoot flames, it is even crazier, especially when it can shoot those flames stock. Of course, that's for the ones that you see on the road. My actual favorite is the McLaren P1. And of course, if money wasn't an issue, I would love to own one of those. Anyhow, thanks for watching the video. I hope you learned something today, and even if you didn't, I hope you enjoyed your time. If you liked the video at all, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. It means a lot, especially as a newer channel. I look forward to bringing you much more content. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.